I was on a sales call with a salesperson I was training. So I was running the actual call, and they were there as as a learning experience. And we walk in the house, and the guy was there about my age, mid-50s, and he had his grown son there, and he was on oxygen. And so I just got to talking about, what's going on, and he has this serious lung disease, and we just started talking, and he was a really interesting guy. Back in the day, he was from a pretty rough neighborhood in Chicago, and he was kind of a gangbanger when he was young. He was a tough guy. But now, Father Time had caught up with him. He had this serious illness. It was terminal. He didn't know how long he had, but it was no cure for it. And he was getting worse and worse every year. And I got to talking to the guy, learning his story. And he was in the military, he was in the Navy, and then he went to work in the California Corrections Department. When he was working in the California Corrections Department, he was attacked by a group of inmates that hurt him really bad. Like, he was out of work for 2 years. We talked about that, and I just got to know his story. He was such an interesting guy, from going this gangbanger to the military to a corrections officer to getting beat up, and then he recovered from that and he got this lung disease. We spent an hour talking about his story. Then we got into the mechanical analysis and all that kind of business, and another hour later we're back towards the end, and I'm presenting options to the guy. And I present the options, and his wife wasn't there, so I knew I was going to have a problem at the end. And so I said, I'm going to recommend this. Will you trust me with this recommendation, which is kind of my signature, my first ask, will you trust me? And he goes, well, I trust you, Wally, but, I got to talk to my wife. And I said, well, let's get your wife on the phone. And no, we can't do that. I said, well, I'll come back tonight when she's here. You can't do that. And his name was Jesse. And I said, Jesse, let me ask you a question. When did you decide that you trusted me enough to buy from me? And he looks at his watch. He says, about an hour ago, right? And I said, so it took you an hour to trust me and, be willing to, do this project for you? He goes, yeah, about an hour. I said, do you think it's reasonable, Jesse, that you're going to be able to convey that trust to your wife in 5 minutes? I do this for a living, and it took me an hour. How are you going to convey that to your wife in 5 minutes?